We'll take a few minutes to just to bring yourself back to your body, back to your breath. Settle the mind and body a little bit, and then we'll launch into the topic of the afternoon, which is, I think, grief. So we'll work on that. Okay. The more we get into these teachings over this wonderful week together, the clearer it becomes that grief is just, universal is actually too small a word to describe it. It's part of the very fabric of our existence as ordinary beings cycling through samsara. And so take a few moments to ponder that thought and set for yourself a very clear motivation that this session and all sessions can be used to deepen your own love and compassion, to deepen your wisdom, and to do that for the welfare of all beings. And if you can make your mind big enough to let what we share together in this next hour or so, hour and a half, water the seeds of our own capacity to become Buddha ourselves so that we can truly be a contributor to liberating all beings from this suffering. Okay. Venerable Kunchuk, where should I have this mic? I think it's a little poppy. Lower? Lower, lower? Okay. Okay, good, thank you. So, with apologies, I don't know where my name tag is. My name is Tupten Chuni. I have not met you all, I know that too. So anyway, Venerable Sangye Kadro mentioned this morning that I had agreed to give the talk, which is accurate. And then she said she said something like she has a wealth of information or something like that, and I want to, she said she's very knowledgeable. Well, that is an exaggeration, I think, but I do want to explain why I'm sitting here. 10 years ago, my mother fell flat on her face in the middle of the night, broke her neck. The fall shoved her spine into her brainstem. I got the call some hours later from a sister that I guess it was questionable. I think her husband was trying to do CPR, being told, because she had instant cardiac arrest. so he was being advised on the phone how to try to revive her. And apparently, eventually, the EMTs came and they were able to shock her heart into motion again. There was some rumor that she had actually made some sign of being aware as she left the house. I'm not sure. But then my sister told me, she said she may have not been breathing for 20 minutes. I said, Patty, she's dead. What do you mean? So anyway, my mother was in ICU. And as they now do with brain injuries, they had put her in kind of a deep freeze, lowered her temperature very, very much. And it's, medical people can tell me if this is accurate, but from my understanding, it's that then as they slowly come out of that deep freeze, the brain may reset itself if it's functioning. And so I got to the hospital, I don't know, I guess it was a Wednesday, who knows? It took me 24 hours, however long it takes to get from here to Atlanta, and was able to go straight to the hospital and spend the next 2 or 3 days with her while we waited to see if she was going to come back. And it was pretty clear that she was not going to come back. Unfortunately, my mother was very practical about many things. And one of them was that she had a very clear advance directive. So when her husband and my siblings and I were all meeting with a neurosurgeon, he said very clearly, we think the brain injury is such, she's in a vegetative state. Okay. We could wait another week or two and see if she comes to. If she does, because of the brainstem injury, she will likely be a paraplegic, actually more likely a quadriplegic, and may never breathe again on her own. So there was, there didn't need to be any discussion about that. Her advance directive was very clear. And I could imagine that had she awakened in that sort of paralyzed state, my mother would never forgive us for whatever life was remaining. So fortunately, I didn't have to be a part of making any decision. She had made it. But I spent the last few days, I don't even know how many, you kind of go blurry with the time. But I spent a fair amount of time in that IC unit, mostly spending time with my mom, doing practices with her. The other thing about her having this brain injury is that she was not able to have any sensation whatsoever. So years ago, she was not all that happy about me ordaining to begin with, and just a few days before she died, I had just come out of retreat and had called her. I hadn't talked to her in a few months. And she said, I've been falling a lot. And then she paused and she said, if something happens, I want you to know I'm okay. And I paused. And I said, if something happens, I want you to know I'm okay too. And then she said, oh, and I know that. I'm so happy that you're there at the Abbey with all your sisters. And those were her last words to me. But earlier, so not too many years before that, she had said to me, okay, if you're in the monastery, that's okay. But promise me that on my deathbed, you will come and do your prayers and tell me what a great mother I was. Okay. So I had a commitment to keep. But my image was that I would go and I would sing to her and I would sing her old hymns and I would, put my hands and do a little Reiki on her. We would have this whole, I couldn't touch her. It would send her into a spasm, what do they call those, seizure. I couldn't speak to her too close to the bed. It would send her into a seizure. So I was away from that bed, but for, probably, 2 days or more. I don't know how long I was in there, days. Being able to do my practice and complete with my mother was an amazing experience. And also to be in the ICU unit, what I saw was that, whole families would come in, they would park there, they would camp there. It's too expensive to go out and go to the cafe in the hospital to feed all those people. They'd all bring in food. It would become like this little camp waiting. And then a doctor would come out, would say something, and people would like burst into tears and they'd all go away. And then a whole nother family would come in. Or sometimes the doctor would come out and everybody would be relieved and they'd go see their person or whatever. But it was this wave of people coming in and going out, coming in, going out, grieving, dealing with this nature of life, right? So I was extremely fortunate that many years ago, Venerable Children had talked to us about meditating on the deaths of those people that you're closest to. And I have spent many winter retreats in that meditation hall over there, meditating on the death of my mother, for which I was extremely grateful. But that doesn't mean I wasn't grieving intensely. So at the end of, I don't know, when I came back and was processing all of that stuff through the lens of the Dharma, I was looking for resources, like how does a Dharma person deal with their grief? And I didn't find anything except Lama Zopa Rinpoche's advice. His advice page said over and over and over again, "Dear so-and-so and so-and-so, your mother has given you such a great teaching on impermanence. Rejoice and practice and meditate on that." Next person, "Oh, so-and-so and so-and-so, your father has taught you so much about impermanence. Rejoice and thank him." So at the end of, with all of that, I ended up doing a series of talks on how I would apply the Buddha Dharma to the grief situation, and my teacher gave me an assignment to write a book about that. That was 10 years ago. I have collected a lot of stuff, but I think now I have to actually write it, but while I still have a brain myself. But anyway, that's how I ended up in this seat. So I'm not a grief expert. I am also not a Buddhist expert, but I have thought about this a lot and I have collected a lot of material, so I feel kind of privileged to be able to talk about it. So I want to go back to the definitions, because we looked at the definition, the standard definition of grief from the Oxford Dictionary. This is their short form: deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. The National Cancer Institute calls it the normal response to a major loss, such as the death of a loved one. I mean, that's exactly who they're addressing, right? Grief may also be felt by a person with a serious long-term illness or with a terminal illness, and it may include feelings of great sadness, anger, guilt, and despair. Venerable Children's definition, our teacher's definition, my teacher, our response to change that we didn't want, and our response to getting used to it, which is a pretty accurate description. It's a change we didn't want, and then we have to get used to it. And how we get used to it is part of our grief process. So it's something we've all experienced: separation from people and the situations that we like. The loss is unwanted. It's a surprise. And it's very much embedded in our existence as human beings. I mean, there's no one who has not experienced this. And if you have not lived long enough to experience a direct loss of someone very close to you, of course you will eventually. But even those great big separations, what we talked about before, those also have grief as a response, change that we didn't expect or want, and how we respond to it. So my own definition is that grief is a head-on collision with the four distortions, or the four wrong conceptions. So it's a head-on collision in my wrong conception, my wrong idea about how things are, having a direct experience of true suffering, really, really. So I want to talk about the four distortions and the four wrong conceptions first. Venerable Sangye Kadro has been kind of setting us up for that over the last few days, as she's been talking about the four truths known by the Aryas, and talking about the nature of true dukkha, of true suffering itself. But she hasn't really named it this. And for me, I heard about this, first time I heard this teaching on the four distortions was probably, I don't know, 2020, something like that. Not 2020, 2000, 20 some odd years ago. And it really changed my whole perception of how to deal with this idea of suffering. So it may be helpful in some ways. So the four distortions or the four wrong conceptions. So we've talked about the four truths known by the Aryas, meaning that those beings who can see the nature of reality directly know these things to be true. That cyclic existence is in the nature of dukkha, suffering, that there are causes of that suffering, that there is a possibility of eliminating those causes, and that there is a pathway to do that. That's very simply, basically, the four truths. And each of these four truths also has four aspects. And the Buddha, this can go back to the Buddha speaking in the Pali Sutra, Distortions of the Mind Sutra. He says, perceiving permanence in the impermanent, perceiving pleasure in what is dukkha, perceiving a self in what is not self, and perceiving beauty in what is foul, beings resort to wrong views, their minds deranged, their perception twisted. Such people are bound by the yoke of Mara and do not reach security from bondage. Beings continue in samsara, going repeatedly from birth to death. But, he goes on, when the Buddhas arise in the world and send forth a brilliant light, they reveal this teaching that leads to the stilling of dukkha. Hearing it, wise people regain their sanity. They see the impermanent as impermanent, and what is dukkha as dukkha. They see what is not self as not self, and the unattractive as unattractive. By requiring the right view, they overcome all dukkha. So these four things that he's naming, to see that which is in the nature, very nature of impermanence, momentary by nature, to perceive that as permanent, is one aspect of our suffering, true dukkha. To see things that are in the nature of, by nature unsatisfactory, to see them as a source of happiness, that also causes us suffering. To see that that which is impure by nature, and here the example is the body. I mean, if you really look inside of the body, it ain't so pretty, right? But we have this perception of the body itself being pure and beautiful and attractive and so forth. Grasping that without seeing the whole picture also causes us suffering. And then, as Venerable Sangye Kadro has been trying to get us to lead us to understand, seeing that which is by nature has no intrinsic inherent self, as though it does. That also is a part of our suffering, and it's the very root, actually, of all of our suffering. So studying these four, this expansion, it shows up in Vasubandhu's Dharma text, Treasury of Knowledge. Sangha talks about it in Shravaka Grounds, and the Dharmakirti builds on it in his commentary on reliable cognition. So it has a really good, valuable source, this teaching. And so these four wrong conceptions, seeing that which is impermanent as permanent, seeing that which is in the nature of dukkha as being pleasurable, seeing that which is in the nature impure as being pure, seeing that which has no self as having a self. These very four are innate views that come into us with this life, and they permeate our entire perception of the world. It's how we see the world. It's how we hold it. And we hold these things to be true. We don't even understand. We have no concept that they're not wrong, that they're wrong. Like, why would we? Our senses tell us. I look at this cup and it looks like it's pretty darn permanent. I can't see that it's changing moment by moment. It's not something we can apprehend with our senses. The fact that there's no happiness in this cup, well, if I think about it, sure. But if I treasure this one, if this was given to me by my mother, if it came from her mother, I have in the kitchen my great-grandmother's cornbread pan. I didn't know what else to do with it. It's sitting in there as kind of a, what do you call those things you put under a pot on the stove? It looks like one of those. But it's my great-grandmother's cornbread pan. It's precious. She made it for my great-grandfather, made cornbread every single day. We think it's permanent. We think it has its intrinsic value, right? It causes us suffering. If I don't think about it, the body being impure, I mean, come on. Who wants to think about that? Enough of us here are old enough to actually not be quite so taken with it, but Venerable Children's example is that even so, even now, you buy wrinkle cream, you look, does it need deeper? If I buy the wrinkle cream, is my wrinkle less deep than it was yesterday? Because we're still trying to make this body beautiful no matter how old we get, how saggy we get, how whatever we get. We're constantly looking to try to be attractive and also noticing who is attractive, because we have this idea that that which is by nature foul is pure. This one is a hard one for people to get because we're so attached to our bodies and the bodies of other people. But look, I mean, what comes out of any orifice in the body? Pick one. Do you like it? Do you like it coming from yourself? And do you like it coming from somebody else? Now, I know mothers love their baby's poop. I do know that. It's not true. I have known mothers who say that, who swear that. Yes. That only lasts so long, though, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a short period of time. And then they're ready to teach them to sit on that pot, whether the kid's ready or not. But aside from that, even we have that lovely little bread, the lovely little bread that Venerable Pema's making. It's beautiful. You want to have a bite, you take a bite, but if you chewed a little bit and spit it back out, would you pick it up and eat it again? From your very own mouth? Why? Because our body has befouled it, right? But just bopping through our day, we don't think about that. Is it Shanti Deva that talks about how much we want to suck other people's saliva? I mean, that image alone makes you go, ugh. But have we sucked a lot of saliva, folks? Let's be honest. Yes. Yes, we have. And so then this one about there being no intrinsic, permanent self, independent self, hard to get, but really the very nature of the problem, and that self then being the most important thing on the planet. So these 4 distortions, we're going through our life not thinking about any of this. We're going through our life thinking that, I'm going to be young and beautiful forever, or thinking that this person should be young and beautiful forever, or this person is going to be with me forever, and so forth and so forth. Or that all of my happiness, as long as I have this person with me, I will be happy. As long as we can still connect on this kind of beautiful body connection level, we will always be happy. So when reality strikes and we discover this isn't true, this is a shock. It's a big shock. And that's why I think that really this bottom line definition is the head-on collision with reality and the 4 distortions. And we don't understand it. It's not like it's a crime that we don't get it. We don't. We just don't get it. That is our fundamental ignorance that we're not, unless we have imprints from some past life that has taught us this, it is not going to spontaneously arise in our mind. I'm pretty darn sure. Now, we may have those imprints, and that would be great. But in the meantime, when we're looking at grieving over a loss, grieving over the loss of a person, or the loss of a career, or the loss of our youth, the loss of our mental faculty, these things that are precious to us, they change moment by moment by moment. No surprise. There is no inherent pleasure in any of those objects externally. There is nothing pure about the body that we have lost. There's nothing pure about the body we have. And that sense of self, that sense of that characteristic itself, is the basic confusion. So no wonder we have grief. You know, when our mother dies, we're shocked. When the house burns down, we're shocked. And I think, this is my personal theory, I don't have anything to back it up, but except reflection. But, you know, the symptoms of grief are often so physical. You know, you get disoriented, you get dizzy, you have physical pain. It's like, well, why not? Our entire reality has gone upside down. We are in complete shock. And so we have shock-like responses. I remember this happened to me twice when I was attending people who were dying. One was a good friend, and one was a more distant friend, but he was dying of AIDS, and all of his HIV buddies who promised to be there, in the end, couldn't be there. They could just see their own future, right? So I was the one there with him. But in both cases, I thought I was fine. I'm cool. I'm here. It's it's bad. And then, like for Jane, we wanted to. A group of people. She was Buddhist. A group of people wanted to do the King of Prayers for her as she was dying. So I said, okay. She died in a little house in Ballard in Seattle, not in Ballard, in Wallingford in Seattle. And there was a copy shop in Ballard that I had been to a zillion times. I said, okay, I'll take the prayers. I'll go over to Ballard. I'll copy these, and then when people come, we can do the prayer together. I could not find Ballard. I drove all over that whole area of the city because I was so discombobulated, thinking I was cool. I couldn't find. I think we finally stopped at Walgreens or some weird place. But I had been to this place a zillion times. Couldn't find it. That was the nature of my grief. The same thing happened with Joe. I was fine. And then I suddenly, when I'm driving the car over the curbs in Capitol Hill, it's not a place you want to be messing with other people's cars either. So seeing how even our mind, we think we have it under control. There's this physical reaction. People had that experience before in your own grief where you've just you think you're totally okay, but the body, the mind is not connecting, it's not working. So that's my belief, is that because we are so entrenched in believing in the solidity and the realness and the permanence and the beauty of these things, that we're a little bit shocked. We're really shocked. And Venerable Children has taught a lot about this topic, and she says, no matter what, we can talk about it. She said you can even give a talk about it, but when it comes down to the actual experience, because that's the very nature of samsara. That's how we get it. Oh, wow, that's what this is really about. We are so off the wall in terms of what we think things are, that when grief comes, we get smacked pretty good. We have the opportunity. It's also I think the discussion this afternoon was on attachment, right? And you talked about attachment to the pleasure, I assume. That's where this, the second one about seeing the unsatisfactory by nature as happiness. You remember the B.F. Skinner experiments? Do they still teach about B.F. Skinner anymore? Is that right? Yeah, the rats. So what he was testing as a psychologist was how rats would go after offering them a little bit of grain, training them to be able to tap this lever, and the grain would come. And then he started messing with their minds a little bit. So instead of being consistently giving the grain, it would be a little bit random. So now they started tapping. They'd gotten used to there being a little grain coming, but then they start tapping and there's no grain. Well, what do? They tap again. And what do? They tap again. And then once in a while the grain would come. Oh, they got it. They never stopped tapping. They would keep tapping, looking for. That is exactly what we do. A little bit of pleasure, borrowing my friend's accent, a little bit. And we will tap again and again and again and again because we think the happiness is in that little kibble coming out of the rat chute. The tea that we're hooked to, the person that we're hooked to, the praise that we're hooked to, the foods, all the things that we're completely attached to. We tap, 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 believing that the happiness is in those things. And then when we're separated from them, we get angry if it's mild. If it's tragic, then we fall into grief. That separation feels permanent. So it's no wonder that we get so flipped out when we lose something that is of major importance to us. We're clinging to it with all of our might without even really knowing it. Have you ever been separated from someone, a person, or something that you thought, oh, no problem, I can handle this? And then they're actually gone? And you're a basket case. Anybody? Yes, a couple of people have had that experience. Yeah. We don't know that we're clinging. And that's kind of part of our ignorance. We're clinging so tightly. It's so much a part of our way of viewing the world that we don't even know we're clinging until we don't have it anymore. So this is, Venerable Rabina calls this our junkie mind, that we're a junkie for pleasure. It starts with our tea or coffee first thing in the morning, and then all day long we're reaching for that. And that's that attachment to that pleasure, that's what's driving us. And that's what's driving samsara. That's seeking for the pleasure or craving not to be separated from it. That's the bottom line thing. So what does that have to do with grief? Well, for one thing, I think it normalizes it. It makes it like, oh, of course I have grief. Why do I have shame about that? Why do I think I shouldn't have this? I do. Does it mean that it's inevitable that we suffer tremendously from this? No. And that's where I think the Buddha Dharma has some real ways to help us. Because here's what the Buddha says. So again, Buddha says this. I think, I couldn't find the exact sutra, but I have the quote. He says, not from weeping nor from grieving will anyone obtain peace of mind. True? True. On the contrary, the pain will be greater and his body will suffer. His, of course. He will make himself sick and pale, yet the dead are not saved by the lamentation. Nobody's saved. People pass away and their fate after death will be according to their deeds. And that we can't do anything about. If a man live 100 years or even more, he will at last be separated from the company of his relatives and leave the life of this world. He who seeks peace should draw out the arrow of lamentation and complaint and grief. He who has drawn out the arrow and has become composed will obtain peace of mind. He who has overcome all sorrow will become free from sorrow and be blessed. So that's where I'm on a bandwagon these days, that acceptance is actually the first step. That we accept these four. And you have to practice to do that. We have to meditate on it. We have to think about impermanence a lot. And not really until we have now I have to check this exactly, but I think I heard a geshe say that until you realize emptiness, you can't really realize impermanence. But the realization of subtle impermanence is what precedes your realization of emptiness. Yeah, so I need to check this. But for sure, we can't perceive it with our senses. It has to be realized through inference. That means we have to think about it again and again and again and again, that things change. Everything that is conditioned phenomena is changing like this constantly. So how do we know that? I mean, it's not like you're a child and you're born, and then at the age of 1, you suddenly are like a 1-year-old. And then you're the same, and then on your second birthday, you're suddenly a toddler. It's not like that at all. Every single moment there is change happening, and we cannot see it with our eyes. We can see change over time, and that's why some of these reflections on just examining, recalling how much the body's changed over the course of your lifetime, how much someone else has changed over the course of your lifetime, paying attention to the seasons. You know, we look at the pictures of the Abbey from when it was founded, and the trees are so much taller. Taller now. Yeah, they're way taller now. You look at those pictures, it's like, gosh, you can see all the way around. Now the trees are way up there. I didn't notice until we started making a little video about the Abbey's 20th birthday. Change, just like this. That familiarity helps a lot as the first antidote. And I think familiarity with all 4 distortions is an antidote unto itself. To spend time really meditating and reflecting on that. Can you see why? Is that making sense? If we just meditate on the truth of these things. And I will also acknowledge that meditating on this stuff at the beginning can make you really angry. I was angry for a long time. I was angry because I didn't believe in permanence per se. And I don't think I actually believed that there was happiness in the object. Maybe I did, 100%. But then to find out that what I had learned, what I had been told, I was laying the trip on the whole of society and not taking responsibility myself, I was angry. And if there's no happiness there, then where is it? And that requires us to look a little bit to find that out. Look a lot and find that out. So there is something about, Venerable Children often cites this comment that someone made to her once, that when someone dies, Buddhism doesn't really give you much comfort. And I have to say, having meditated on these when my mom died, I found this so deeply comforting. It was such a support. It was so helpful. I'm sitting there in this funeral, and the preacher is talking about, we're all going to meet, these are God's promise, we're all going to meet our mother in heaven again. And I don't know who there believed it, but somehow to just listen to that and think, no, this is the nature of things. This is a natural way of things. I don't need special promises about what's to come. And my mother wasn't Buddhist, but she was a naturalist. She was a person who observed the world, observed the nature itself. And I think she would have agreed. This is just natural. And therefore, being just natural, my pain is that clinging. My clinging. Yes, I did not realize that my mother was the very ground I was standing on until that ground wasn't there. I never thought of that way before. But that was mine to work through, right? So I think knowing these 4 distortions and thinking about them right there is an antidote unto itself. Roshi Joan Halifax has done a lot of work in people with dying, and Being with Dying is an excellent resource. I recommend that book a lot. But in it, she says, grief can ruin us or mature us. We've all known people ruined by grief. I have. And Venerable Children says something similar. She says how we're ennobled by our suffering or we're swamped by it. Either one. And so to develop the resources so that we can be ennobled, that we can be matured, is part of the process, I think, of learning to be with our grief, to use it on the path. And that, I think, is the next point in terms of what are the antidotes. There are so many that the Dharma offers us that we have to be prepared for, you know. But Venerable Sangye Kadra is going to talk about Lojong, the thought training teachings, but so I won't go into that at all. But there is a slogan in those, in the, oh, shoot, what's the name of the text? The Lojong, huh? Yeah, the 7-point mind training text. The slogan that says, immediately join whatever you meet with meditation. If we have that as a habit, if that's our way of viewing the world, then immediately join whatever you meet with meditation is going to take us straight to, how do I work with this from the inside? How do I work with this with my understanding of the nature of reality as I have ingested it or digested it to this point? We don't need to be a great scholar on the nature of emptiness. There's so many ways that the Buddha's practical teaching helps us take whatever we meet into meditation. And so this practice of transforming adversity into the path is the foundation. It's like bring everything into our practice. If we bring everything that we experience into our wish to understand and enrich ourselves and make ourselves more able to benefit others, then no matter what happens, we've just given it meaning. We've endowed it with meaning because it strengthens us and helps us develop the tools to be of greater service to others, if that's your motivation, or to deepen our understanding of the nature of reality so we can get out of it, if that's your stronger motivation. But it makes it purposeful. It gives it meaning. And the very first antidote on that is meditating on impermanence. Now, when we first learn about attachment, the first antidote we hear is, oh yes, impermanence. And many times I have given talks on this topic, and I say, what is the antidote to attachment? Impermanence. And then I say, how many people have actually used this and had it be effective? Very few people raise their hands. I think it is the best antidote, but it's not something that we can come to after the fact of the horrible thing that's happened. If we come to it with a great familiarity that, oh, this is another example, then we're miles ahead of the game. Then we have a level of acceptance that's already in motion. But if you come to it when you had a great loss and then it's impermanence, it's useless to think about it in that way. But even if we haven't spent that much time with it, if we can come to it with an open heart that starts to see, oh, everyone experiences this, then we're not alone in it anymore, and meditation on impermanence is more helpful. That's my thought. Object doesn't last, the pleasure doesn't last. If that's true, then clinging to it doesn't make sense. But that thought doesn't make sense until we're convinced that things don't last. Because we have this, it should last. Okay, they don't last, but they should. That's the fallback position. So it's good to watch our minds. A very, very dear friend of the Abbeys, or maybe just the people who did this class in Spokane for many years, the couple is in their mid-90s, and one of them, the husband in this couple, passed away yesterday. They've been married, they got married in 1951. 70 some odd years. I don't know how they're doing, how the family's doing. But even then, how could it not come to mind this shouldn't happen? They know it is. But when we get right there, really, it's going to happen. I think I told you, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, I'm very sorry to hear about your mother. I've done prayers for your mother. Your mother has given us a good teaching. She has shown us that the nature of life is impermanence, and death can happen at any time. This is the same teaching on death and impermanence that Buddha gave when he showed the aspect of passing away. It's the last teaching he gave. It was among the first teachings he gave. It was right there. It was number one. It was the number one teaching. It is the last teaching he gave. It is like really important. Really, really important. And so, we looked at those 7 stages of grief from the psychological point of view the other day. And acceptance is the final stage on that list. You go through all these other things, denial and anger and bargaining, and I don't remember what all the options were. And then acceptance is the final thing. I do believe that meditation on impermanence makes acceptance come very close to the top. Now, accepting the death or accepting the loss is not the same thing as accepting the pain. So we have to do both. So even if we accept the loss, the fact that it hurts, even His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I have a little quote here where he lost his mother. It was painful. It was sad. He's been meditating on this for many, many, many more lifetimes than I have. But I think if we accept that the loss is natural, then we can accept that the pain or our response is also natural. And then we can work with that more fully, more completely. So accepting can move way higher up on that list with confidence in impermanence. And then, we can extrapolate. So Geshe Dadul, who we're also still grieving, but in my interview with him about grieving in the Tibetan tradition, he said, there's a phrase, that which was liable to occur has occurred. That which was going to happen has happened. And from the moment the sperm, the egg, and the consciousness connect and attach to that womb wall, that being is going to die. When, we don't know. How, we don't know. But that which was liable to happen will occur and has occurred. So as a main antidote, this takes a lot of time. As Venerable Sangye Kadra was saying again and again, she said it many times. So this advice to meditate on permanence as much as we can, to incorporate that into our practice, especially if you know that you have big attachments to certain people, our teachers, for example, to really spend time thinking about that change, to prepare our minds. We're going to die too. And that's on our list of meditations we should be doing. Can be doing. Forget the should. Can be doing. But this body's going to fail. It's like everything else fails us, the body fails us too. And we can grieve, and we grieve that loss too. We grieve it in advance. Anticipatory grief. So meditation on impermanence is one of the main antidotes. And I want to say that doesn't stop the pain. I have a note from a friend. I won't identify her, but she says, I wake most mornings remembering death as my first thought. I've had an envelope filled with instructions ready to go, labeled what to do when I die, for years. what does this mean for my life? It makes me more patient. It helps me stop negativity when it arises in my mind. It makes me need things less. It makes me want to be generous. It makes me not get caught up and stuck in nonsense. For the past 8 months since my son's sudden death, I have been so sad. I'm still sad. And when he died so suddenly, I was shocked. I don't care how many death meditations you have done or what you think you know and understand about impermanence, you are going to be utterly shattered. Never mind, shocked. This is a person, this is a great practitioner. This is a person who could accept that death and is also accepting the pain of it. So I brought this up to be sure that we don't promise, we don't have this sense of, oh, if I just meditate on impermanence, it's not going to hurt. As long as we don't have the realization of the nature of reality, the shock of that separation is going to continue. It's going to continue to the extent that we are familiar with it. I mean, the other example I have is Venerable Children, when her mother died. I was at that time arranging her talks and stuff, and the morning she got her call that her mother had died, she was supposed to go give a talk at some women's club. Maybe it was the University Women's Club in Spokane. They wanted to know about compassion. And I said, do you want me to, book a flight for you? And she said, no. There's a room full of people who want to know about the compassion, who want to know about the Buddha's teaching. I will go talk to them, and then I will go home. And there's nothing I can do now anyway, right? Completely didn't miss a step. I am going to go benefit sentient beings. That's my mission. And then I will go deal with my mother's death. I don't know what happened once she got there. I know she had a very lovely time with the corpse, doing prayers and so forth and so forth. I mean, she did all the rituals that she did. But the calm and the ease with which that death was accepted, and the lack of consternation around, oh, I need to give up everything and go do something. No, I'm going to go benefit sentient beings. That's what I'm here for. That also was a very, very impactful experience. So being sad is normal and natural, and if you're not sad, that is also okay. We don't have to shriek and wail to prove our love, which some people think we do, right? So here's another antidote that I think is to normalize the situation. So the Kisa Gotami story that Venerable Munlam brought up in the meditation the other night. So remember the woman during the Buddhist time whose only son died and she carried the body around, asking for medicine to save the child. And finally someone said, you need to go see the Buddha, not because they thought the Buddha could save the child, but because somebody needed to help this poor woman. And the Buddha then sends her out and says, I can help you. Please bring me this mustard seeds from X number of mustard seeds and bring it from a family that has never known death. And then she goes door to door to door to door to door, and there's no such thing as a family that has never known death. So that's a very good analogy for this time, but we have modern day versions. So an estimated, look this up, this has changed since my mother died, an estimated 166,859 people die on this planet every day. Over 6,900 people die every hour. 116 people die per second. 61 million people die each year. Is what happened to my loved one unusual? Surprising? One of the 6,900 people who died this hour Another thing that really weirded me out when my mom died, I was looking for her obit because I came back. I was in Atlanta with the family, but I came back and I never saw her obituary. Was I here? I was there. Anyway, I went online to find it. And my mother's name was Beth Morris. So I put in obit, Elizabeth Morris. 6 women named Elizabeth Morris popped up that had died in the previous 4 months. Not only was my mother not the only person who died, she wasn't the only Beth Morris who died. And of those 7 women, 5 were younger than she was. I was really freaked out. That was just creepy. But somehow the ownership of that precious person, it wasn't even her name. They all died. They all had nice obits. The people who wrote them loved them. And my mother's was just another obituary. Wow. That was sobering and soothing. This is a natural thing. It's just what happens. We all experience it. So another antidote, Venerable Children advises, especially rejoice in what we had. Instead of focusing on what we've lost, turn around and look at all that we had in this relationship with this other person. How fortunate I am to have known this person. How fortunate I am to have known this person for as long as I did. Think about what qualities they had, what gifts we learned, have you ever noticed, if you really think about the people you've known in your life, what impact people have had on you? It doesn't even have to be a major relationship, just sometimes just an anecdote that you meet with somebody, a total stranger in the airport, stays with you for the rest of your life. So surely these people that we're missing and grieving have had a big impact that we can celebrate for. I mean, Joan Halifax talks about how after the death of her father, she can see that his children and his grandchildren carry on the gifts that he was able to give. We can see that in other people. If we think about Jeffrey, oh my gosh, the reverberating waves of people that will carry on his work for generations to come, you can only rejoice in a life of virtue. So, okay, we don't all have close relationships with Jeffrey Hopkins, but the people that touched us in our lives were very, very meaningful. So spending time rejoicing in what they gave and rather than what we've lost. And write them a letter. Write it down. Who was talking about journaling? It came up a couple of times. Yeah. And save it. When I was preparing for this, I found a couple of letters I wrote to my mother over the years. Because the other thing about grief that I learned that surprised me, it's like I did quite well in the first few weeks. And then I came home and I was thinking about it and I thought, and it was like, okay, now I passed the test, come back. They're gone. That was a whole second wave. Like, oh, this is real. This was not a little test. It's done. Another antidote is to let the grief fuel our renunciation. Think, why do we hurt? That's attachment. Love doesn't hurt. Compassion doesn't hurt. And we may have, and for sure we have love. And we have compassion for this person. But the pain is the pain of our attachment. And the love for our dear one is not measured in the amount of pain we feel at their passing. This is really important to get in. And I think in our culture, it's a sneaky belief that we kind of hold. I mean, we don't even know we have it. That's why they're professional grievers. So maybe it's not just our culture. Maybe it is, this culture. Professional grievers from Ireland, right? The Keeners made a lot of money. That's not the measure of our love. And of course, we may feel angry, we may feel confused, in addition to sad. There's no wrong emotion related to the loss. Or if we are in pain and afflicted from the loss of a loved one, it is stemming from our attachment and stemming from our misunderstanding of these 4 distortions, right, across the board. So if we're going to use this to take it to meditation, then we think, oh, this is my attachment that's causing this pain. Let me cultivate the antidotes to attachment. This is how it feels. This is how it has felt since beginningless time, and it's how it's going to continue to feel until I am able to develop the mind that overcomes that affliction. What do I need to do that? So we use the antidotes to the affliction for the short term, and we do our best to cultivate the wisdom that will root it out for the long term. And then there's another one. There's a few more here, but I think people are losing juice. This one is a really important one. So let the grief grow our compassion to fuel our own bodhicitta motivation. Right? You'd think that might be the first one to come up, but actually it has to rest on this foundation of understanding the nature of impermanence. And when we do that, and take this into our practice, then developing compassion for the universal experience is the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah. And the taking and giving meditation, which I'm sure Venerable Sangye Kadra was going to talk about, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it's basically the idea of, if I'm going to suffer from this, let my suffering suffice for everyone. For everyone's pain who is experiencing a loss like this. Let me take that on. And in that way, can I grow my compassion to a wider and wider and wider and wider group. So that at least it enriches and deepens this virtuous mind that I need in order to progress along the spiritual path, in order to truly be of benefit to others. Let this loss do that for me. And by that, I'm willing to take on the suffering of others. There's a little storybook. I think it must have come out in the early 60s, because I think I read it to my little sister. But it's about a little bird. I think it's a bird. It must be a bird. Or chicken, maybe, who is pecking away, and it's about to hatch. And the mother knows that, and so she flies off to get some food for the baby whenever it comes, right? But while she's gone, the little bird comes out. So it comes up into an empty nest, and he falls out of the nest. And in this storybook, he starts looking for, are you my mother? He starts looking, are you my mother? He goes to a dog. Dog says, I'm a dog. I'm not your mother. He goes to some other creature. Are you my mother? No, I'm not your mother. He eventually goes to something like a earth digger, one of these things. What are they called? Backhoe will do. Okay, goes to a backhoe. Are you my mother? Well, the backhoe can't answer him, but the backhoe actually puts him back in the nest. Somehow puts him up, and mother finds him. But this idea of, are you my mother? Once we are looking for if we have that loss, right? Everywhere we look, are you my mother? Suddenly that turkey chick, are you my mother? The tick we pulled off ourselves in the woods, are you my mother? The person on the street, that panhandler who we're debating on whether we're going to give him a sandwich or $1, Are you my mother? If we have that kind of mind, are you my mother? Going to the idea of every sentient being having been our mother, then we are approaching people with a kind of an open heart that we don't usually have. I don't usually have. There's an open-heartedness that our grief brings us that is very precious. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. And I think taking that moment to enrich and enhance that compassion for other beings is very, very useful and helpful, precious, a precious thing to do. I was grieving a loss at one point in my life and went down to the the Whole Foods store from time to time, where they had a little cafe. I would sit there and drink my coffee and just do Tonglen, taking and giving meditation for the people walking through the grocery store. It wasn't for you, my mother, so much as it was, do you have a broken heart? Here, take mine. Do you have a broken heart? Do you have a broken heart? It was, anytime I felt lonely, anytime I felt separated, anytime I felt not supported, it was so helpful. All of these people in the grocery store, everybody in there has a broken heart of some kind. Everybody in there has experienced loss. It was the best antidote in the world for cultivating this sense of not being separated, right? So we use it to grow our big heart. Or that promise. I think Brahma broke this up too. Okay, dear loved one, I can't help you now, but I will find you. I will find you. When I'm a Buddha, I will find you and I will get you out of this. That kind of commitment from our heart goes with us and stays with us. And that only comes up when we're really deeply grieving, I think. Now it'll come up more, but it's a promise. Because then you have to ask, well, then how many mothers have I promised that to? Oh, maybe all of you. I better buck up my behavior, haven't I? And then this last one, no, there's two more. Offer the loved one to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's Venerable Children's suggestion. Push comes to shove. We know we can't do anything for them wherever they are. Offer them to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. How do I do that? Imagine them healthy, whole, imagine them in any way you want, symbolize them in any kind of way. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, please take this, please take and guide this person. And it's not me, I'm not responsible. But somebody who has the capacity to do something can take them. And then there's many ways that we do virtuous actions on behalf of the person who's passed away. We have two friends whose one of their sons was an aid worker somewhere, Africa, I think. Anyway, he was killed in the line of work. It was heartbreaking for the family. They set up scholarships. They offer aid to that country. They did all kinds of things in memory of that son, and that was a long time ago. But the continued benefit that they have done in memory of that continues and continues and continues. Generating merit on the behalf of others. We have another friend in Singapore who was so astonishing when his father died. He got the whole family, I don't know how many people involved. They went to temple after temple after temple. They made offerings at the temple. They gave things away as a whole family, generating merit on behalf of their father. It was beautiful. So there are ways of it's not even ritualizing away, it's just experiencing this wish to help them, generate merit on their behalf. And then finally, there's two things. His Holiness had a beautiful little talk. He spoke at the Corona Hospice in 2008. He said, at the time of my own mother's death, and also particularly at the death of my teacher, Of course, I feel very sad. Then if I made my mind up, if I remain in too much sadness, then if my teacher or my mother knew about my mental state, they would worry. Of course, the death of one of your closest friends is very sad, but still, if you remain more composed and carry your service or your meaningful life even more rigorously, then your loved one might think, I'm not there now, but my friend still carries on full of strength and full of enthusiasm, and that will make them much happier. He says the remaining people, of course, are sad, but that already happened. That death already happened. It's done. Too much worry is no help to return or revive that person. It just ruins your own health and your own peace of mind. So actually, that's the tragedy. So usually he said, I give that kind of suggestion when people come to me. So even His Holiness the Dalai Lama was sad. But to think about, if they knew, would they want me to be this upset? No. Would they want me to continue my work? Yes. And so doing that on their behalf. There's one more thing I want to say, and that is if the relationship was messy, this makes it harder. A lot harder. When Venerable Sangye Kajo, Venerable Tenzin Kacho, former Venerable, now Tenzin Kacho, was here some years ago. She was a nun, Tibetan Buddhist nun for a number of years and worked still as a grief and counselor, death and dying, chaplain. And eventually decided that the way her work was going, that it was better for her to no longer be ordained. But she has a lot of wisdom. And when she taught here many years ago, she was still a nun and was teaching about death and dying, and taught us this 4 phrases that's so powerful for cleaning up our relationship with others. The 4 most important things, I think there's a book by Dr. Ira Bjak, 4 things that matter the most. And this is the advice she gives to everyone who is grieving. If the person is still alive and they're in the process of dying, do it while they're alive. If not, sit down and write the letters that go with this. The 4 most important things to say: I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It's number 1. Number 2, I forgive you. Number 3, I thank you. Number 4, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, actually, is the way to say it. I forgive you. I thank you. I love you. And it may take us some work to get to I forgive you. And it may take some work even to get to please forgive me. Because we have to own, is there something there unfinished, unclean, that I need to make that request of? But when we get to thank you and I love you, then that's kind of all that matters, right? And then working at that level with these 4 simple phrases kind of clears out the muck. We can let the person go. We can let the person experience their own karma. And we can go on with our life appreciating the blessing of having been in relationship with that person. So these are some of the things I've learned. Grief and loss are based on the fact that everything arises, changes, nothing remains the same. And we shouldn't expect that we can sit on a cushion and do these meditations and stand up and feel great. It takes time. That's why going back to feeling the pain is part of what we need to accept. As long as we fight that, we're fighting with reality. As long as we fight the loss, we're fighting with reality. And as Venerable Children tells us, reality always wins. There's no way around that. But having the courage and the commitment to do these meditations, our mind changes. The grief changes. And, especially I can't imagine losing a child. I never had one, and I cannot conceive of what the pain of losing a child would be. Never goes away, I'm sure. I know it doesn't. I don't even have to say that. But even that, most of painful loss all of this can be applied to, and it can become meaningful and valuable in our life, in our practice, and of benefit to others as well. If we enact this kind of stuff, then that loss becomes of great value to other people too. Okay, that's my spiel. Yeah. Okay.
I had two things. One, the 4 things that matter the most. This works even when the person has died years ago, and to really process it and feel settled with what happened. So it doesn't matter when they died.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the second thing is when you were talking about meditating on our own death is very helpful. The other thing that's very helpful for me as an older person now is to meditate and grieve on those things that I'm losing in terms of function, etc. Then my death is going to be easier. It's not going to be such a shock because I'm already processing the changes that I can feel now.
Yeah, thank you. Totally true. Lots of nodding heads. Any other questions or comments? There's a lot of people here too that I know have experienced loss and have done it well. So please share your antidotes too.
Do you have any reflections or advice on for those who have lost someone to suicide and there's the feeling that you could have done something to stop it, like how you work with that, and maybe talk about interdependence or
there's something that I left out. There's a lot of material I left out, but Venerable Children wrote a beautiful meditation on how to say goodbye to someone who was suicided. It's on her website. Just Google it. I've used it a couple of times, and I've also adapted it for people who didn't suicide. But it's kind of following the same line of forgiveness, forgiving them, forgiving ourselves, asking forgiveness in case there really was something that could have been done, but mostly there isn't. Mostly there isn't. So a part of that meditation has to do with I recognize the pain that you must have been in. And I accept that pain. I accept that that was your condition. I grieve that too. But I know that only that level of pain would have led you to this. So it's a very kind of beautiful and personal exchange of accepting the person for who they were, for the choices they made, and helping ourselves to be, with them, in that saying goodbye meditation. And it ends with, and I send you with my love. And that's always Venerable Children's advice. Send them off with love. No matter what, send them off with love. And so looking at these 4 important things, I forgive you. Please forgive me. Yeah. Thank you. And I love you. Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable. That's amazing presentation. And I'm wondering if in your research you came across Stephen Jenkinson. There's a incredible documentary on grieving called Grief Walker. And he's a very interesting palliative care provider in Canada who went to Harvard Divinity School and then ended up adopting like Native American beliefs and applying that in palliative care. But it makes, the documentary itself is really powerful because he deals a lot with people who are losing children. And he was originally, they called him the angel of death because he had a uncanny ability to show up when people were dying. But he makes his main takeaway, the reason that the documentary is called Grief Walker, and it was a documentary filmmaker who lost a child and then made this film about how much help he got from Stephen, is that his point is very similar to what you're talking about here. He calls grieving the other side of loving. And his advice is you have to, like the minute you get married to somebody, the minute you enter into a relationship, if you're not bringing impermanence into the relationship in a conscious way, and what we normally do is treat that as a taboo subject and pretend like you're not going to die anytime soon, then you can't actually completely love the person. So your love is not complete unless it's informed by this courage in facing the fact that this is an impermanent, that we are going to separate and one of us is going to die. So I just wanted to share that.
What's his last name?
Jenkinson.
Stephen Jenkinson. Yeah. Okay.
He also wrote a book called Die Wise, which really shook up the hospice and palliative care industries in the same way that hospice originally sort of was a reaction to medicalized death. He kind of takes on the hospice industry and says, you know, that you're doing it wrong too. So, yeah, the book, Die Wise.
Thank you. It's pretty brilliant. Yeah. Any question, comment, Venerable Damcha?
I didn't want to interrupt Venerable Monlam in the meditation, but I do think in the end Kisa Gotami becomes a nun.
She becomes an arhat.
Yeah, exactly. She's in the Therigata. So there are happily ever afters. No. And at the end of the month, we have the Exploring Monastic Life program.
You're shameless. Yeah, she became an arhat. Mm-hmm. She used that grief well. No questions, comments, experiences? Yes, Matt.
A question about the seeing what's not beautiful as beautiful. Does that apply to all things, or would it be considered that? Because I know the first three, impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, apply to all things. Does the beautiful is nothing? Are we not supposed to see anything as beautiful?
No, it's not that. It's that we're not supposed to cling to, and we should look at it. It's like, it's like, I mean, the body is the main example that I'm most familiar with, and that's the one that gets hammered in to us the most. There's plenty of beauty in the world, but who was telling me this story? They were driving with Kadrala, who's the Dakini who has been helping Lama Zopa Rinpoche. She's a realized being of some level, we don't know what. But they were going up somewhere, they were in Nepal, and they were going up over a mountain, and there was this incredible sun. It was a nun who was telling me the story. This incredible sunset, maybe, and it was just breathtaking. And the nun was going, "Oh, Kadra, look at this beautiful sunset. Can you just imagine?" And Kadrala just sat there and said, "I don't see it that way." It wasn't that she doesn't see beauty, but she wasn't captured by this dependently arising phenomenon that is going to change any moment. I mean, it didn't excite her and thrill her like it does us because we don't have anything else to make us happy, right? She's on some meditative state that doesn't need to be thrilled by the sunset. But I don't think that means she doesn't appreciate it. You know, I mean, we do our best to make beautiful offerings. When we visualize our offerings to the Buddhas, it's not like they're beautiful. We don't just give them old shoes, right? So it's more, has more to do with how we cling to these things. I spent a fair amount of my life in the performing arts, looking for ways to ennoble our, I didn't realize this at the time. Afterwards, now that I've been in the Dharma for a long time, it's like just trying to ennoble our suffering. Because suffering is so much a part of our lives. What do we do? Let's make beautiful music. Oh, what do we do? Let's make a beautiful play. What do we do? Let's make a beautiful quilt. Anything to help overcome this kind of constant dukkha within which we live. But we get so attached to it, and then we think that's the solution. And then, you know, the song's only as good as what, the singer or the era. I mean, I listen to music now and I'm like, people like this? What happened to melodies? I have no idea. Right? So it's like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. And of course we appreciate beauty. But if we cling to it, trouble every time. Okay. Thank you. Let's have dinner or whatever. But let's dedicate. And let's dedicate for our great teacher. We can dedicate prayers. Oh, I wanted to talk about praying, but we're not going to do that right now. But this thing about dedicating merit on behalf of other people, prayers that we say for a period of time after someone has passed. Geshe-la, in this interview with him, he said, you know, it is said in the scriptures that our relationships are 7 generations deep. Not generations, 7 generations biologically, 7 generations karmically. So our karmic connections with others, we don't know what they are, but continuing to dedicate merit on behalf of those people who have passed away works. So that also soothes our mind. Anyway, so let's dedicate for Jeffrey, who just passed away today. And George, and also for so many people in our world right now are ill and dying. That their virtue may continue to and far into the future and continue to benefit many beings, as may we too.